I'm not in the litter box. Although I am kind of delighting at someone, which is to say most people who don't have context for that question.
No. We don't provide context.
We don't provide any context.
I just want to, for the record, in terms of not providing context, I listened to last week's podcast because I wasn't able to attend. I listened last night, and I did really enjoy your shout out to the light cone militia. That was very subtle and appreciated.
Listen, you got to have the callbacks to previous episodes.
Absolutely.
So, hey, speaking of previous episodes, just a really sad note that we just at the top here. For those that did not see, Chris Nova, who was a guest on the podcast last year and a really beloved technologist, died in a climbing accident last week. And really gutted to see that news yesterday. I think that everyone was really in shock. Chris is someone who had a real, especially Chris would have loved this episode, right? I mean, this is right up her alley in a lot of ways, in terms of infrastructure as code and DevOps, and a real light in the industry. Who, Adam, I re-listened to that episode yesterday. I just wanted to rehear her in her own voice, and really was reminded again what a great presence she was, and really tragic that she was taken from us so soon. So that was a very sad note over the weekend, and our hearts obviously go out to Chris's family and loved ones who I know are devastated by the loss. So Chris, you will live on in our hearts for sure. But we miss you today.
Absolutely.
So, and then Adam, you mentioned that you were listening to last week's episode.
Yes.
Where first of all, had you heard Fred Brooks's voice?
No, I hadn't. It was delightful not only to hear his voice, but to hear your impersonation of him, which was very well crafted.
My Foghorn Leghorn impersonation of Fred Brooks, who I just had not heard his voice before the podcast. Did want to give an update on that the Silver Bullet was announced at 10:59 a.m. on Tuesday, and I'm feeling pretty good about my prediction. Namely, there's going to be technical depth, and it is not going to be the biggest paradigm shift in software development in the last 30 years. So, interesting stuff there for sure. But I feel safe with the, it's a little gutsy to record the podcast on Monday for a Tuesday announcement.
Really calling your shot, exactly. When you could have just waited 12 hours or something. But yeah.
I know. And did you have any context for anything that was going on for you, or had you seen any of that?
I had just barely enough context because I had seen the proclamations of 100 Exitude, so I did have enough context for the sub podcast. But I have not caught up on the big announcement. So glad that there is some technical depth, but also not surprised to hear your report that it's not a silver bullet.
Not a silver bullet. So Fred Brooks can be assured from beyond the grave there that he's still does not need to we don't need to update that essay quite yet. And then another thing you may have missed is, which gets us kind of on point today, is the Hashi announcement. When was that? That was I remember it well because the day that COVID infected our house. So it was August 10th. So 11 days ago, I guess. So just saw that kind of popping through. And had you, but you were obviously had other things to focus on.
Yeah, but was lucid enough to kind of take a look through that, and I was really disappointed. I mean, I don't know about you, but I really think of hold Hashi in a lot of respect, and I have used and contributed to Hashi projects. So I was really disappointed to see them going the BSL route, which which is terrible.
Are we going to distinguish the BSL route by even like calling it the BSL? I just feel like this is a. This is not open source.
It's not open source, and I mean, I'm not going to say to their credit, because not to their credit, but they don't refer to BSL as open source. They have in their FAQ a bunch of euphemisms that use the word source and availability and things like that, but don't kind of paint it as a open source ish choice. They merely like imply that there is some relationship.
FAQ is bad. FAQ is really bad. I mean, just this idea that we should describe what happened. And then by way of introducing our guests here, we've got Josh and Malcolm here. And actually, we'll turn to them and have it. Josh, do you want to describe what they announced? And I'd actually be curious if you had any kind of heads up on this before they announced it.
Sure. So first, it's really great to be here. This is a really cool podcast. So thanks so much for having me. So as far as what they announced, the key summary was that all of their major open source projects used to be MPL licensed, and it's been that way for anywhere from 5 to 9 years, depending on the project. And about 2 weeks ago, they made the fateful decision to change from that open source MPL license to this so-called BSL or business source license. And that's not a really well-known license. So I'm the co-founder and chief product officer at Gruntwork, and we do a lot of work with Terraform. We were not given any kind of heads up, and so it was just one of those things that was shared like in our company Slack the day it came out. And
so you had no heads up on this.
Yeah, no heads up.
I don't know why I'm acting surprised, because so much else about this has been mishandled, but that just seems, because this is something you've built a business around in terms of Terraform is at the kind of the foundation of what you're doing, it sounds like.
So Gruntwork helps companies with what we call DevOps foundations, and we've always thought of ourselves as agnostic to the technologies. We just wanted to choose the best technology, but we always thought Terraform is the best tool for the job. And so we wound up building up hundreds of thousands of lines of code of like commercial grade modules, all written in Terraform, along with a bunch of tools like CI/CD and that use Terraform and things like that. So it's very much a layer in our stack, and it was kind of shocking to see that a layer that we had just assumed was open source and would always be open source was not. One of the jokes in our Slack internally was, we said in life there are 3 certainties: death, taxes, and Terraform will always be open source. And so that third one.
Wow.
It turned out to be wrong.
I honestly thought you were going to say death, taxes, and an update for our community are the I mean, you must have just been feeling the color drain out of you reading that. I mean, that must have been just shocking then. I mean, certainly... I mean, like you, I've always viewed, and I love their choice of the MPL v2. We all are also big MPL fans, and I just did not see this coming at all. That must have been really gutting to see. And so, can I ask you, because I think Adam and I are trying to figure this out. Adam was like, look, I know, I was sick, so I think I missed the day that they announced the rationalization for this. I think that
Well, just we've seen this kind of thing before, right? With Confluent, we've seen it with Mongo, where it was kind of clear that they felt like they were getting a raw deal from cloud providers, and they, I don't know, misguidedly, but felt like they could provide some protections using this kind of legal mechanism. And it just wasn't clear at all to me who Hashi was worried about.
Okay. So can you answer that question, please? Because I have the same question. Like, who is this? Okay, like, look, we talked about who are we? Yes, we had an episode that was a sub tweet. Who are we talking about here? Who's the target of this?
Yeah. So what's funny is those of us who thought we might be targeted by it kind of had no doubt. So it is interesting to hear the other perspective. Um, so there's a number of alternatives to some of the commercial Terraform products out there. Just to name the most popular ones, there's Terra Team, who's the co-founder of whom is Malcolm, who's on the line with us here. M0, Scalar, Spacelift, and then there are a number of others, and all of them essentially compete with Terraform Cloud. And so I think the narrative internally at HashiCorp was something to the effect of, hey, we HashiCorp are funding all the development for Terraform, but look at all these providers out there competing with us, earning a bunch of money. And some of them are venture backed and have raised multiple rounds of money. And I'm guessing that that was not seen as a positive sign inside of HashiCorp. So, and if you look at some of the FAQ language as well around how they define embedded, it's sort of oddly precise, in my opinion, to target really all these like Terraform for CI/CD type vendors.
Huh. So the target is all of them.
Yeah, I mean, so what's a little weird about this line of questioning is, so a bunch of us in this named group, we all got together, and as I think you're working up to, you know, we ultimately formed a consortium. But one of the kind of philosophical tenets of that consortium is we are not anti-HashiCorp. In fact, we're all very grateful for what HashiCorp created. I mean, Terraform was an amazing technology, and by most measures, they're an amazing company. So it's really important to all of us not to be anti-HashiCorp just because they made a decision that happens not to meet our needs or that we disagree with as members of the Terraform community. But yeah, ultimately there are some implications of that, and that it's worth talking through what those are, because they're
I mean, and I think first of all I should say that I love the spirit of the OpenTF effort in terms of really trying to guide Hashi back to the kind of the right decision here, and also totally appreciate just the spirit by which, like, look, we are grateful for this. This is kind of there's this narrative that we're not seeking to kind of take advantage of the development of others. It is. That said, I just think it is. It's very strange to me that Hashi would kind of go after this was effectively a startup ecosystem, which, I mean, generally startups should not go after other startups. I mean, this is kind of one of those. When you see a startup spending time on other startups, it's like, look, that's the wrong. You should be going after incumbents, and I kind of thought there might be some incumbent. So do you think Terraform, and again, and not to kind of push you out your comfort zone here, but was Terraform the motivation? Because I kind of assumed that Vault would have been the motivation.
You know, great question. I'm not as familiar with the Vault ecosystem, and then it felt like for those of us in the Terraform ecosystem, there were these obviously thriving companies that, you know, maybe HashiCorp felt were counter to its goals for some reason, but I'm just not familiar with the other ecosystems. But even so, the classic example they always give in the FAQ is always like, you can't do Vault as a service. And I didn't know if that was like a straw man example, or if there really are like Vault as a service offerings that companies have been offering that you know, without a partnership with HashiCorp, that they've been trying to crack down. So as far as I have seen, it is focused on Terraform, but I also feel like I'm not personally aware nearly as much of the other systems that they play in compared to the Terraform one.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know of a managed vault outside of HashiCorp, but I do know that other secrets management companies were concerned, particularly those that that wrote their own secrets management software, but they use Terraform to manage their infrastructure. Like now, they're a competitor to HashiCorp. Can they use Terraform? And like this was an early concern, but this is another one of those things that's been amended in the FAQs. So if you're not managing that tool or making a managed offering of that tool, then you're not considered in violation of the Boosel license.
So I missed the amendment to the FAQ. So what was their amendment?
Yeah, they've added a number of amendments, but there was one the other day that was added that said that if you use a Hashi tool, let me look up what number it is real quick. Sorry, I should have these all memorized by now. I've been at this page about 7,000 times. Yeah, Chrome's recommending it to me constantly.
Thanks, Chrome. I hadn't seen this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second here. I can't remember.
And are they? Hopefully, that language is going to be in the license itself. Because I mean, I think it's just, again, I know my perspective on this is maybe slightly sharper than the rest of yours, but I mean, I really think that there's a lot, whether it's deliberate or not, there's a huge amount of ambiguity about. I mean, these are products that are kind of like span the stack. I mean, deliberately, really, and so there's a bunch of questions about who competes with what. The language is pretty vague. And Adam, I mean, we had this issue with Cockroach, where we are effectively using BSL code from Cockroach in Oxide. And I was trying to remember if the more specific language came before or after our use of Cockroach. But Cockroach's language is really very, very specific about because we had the question of like, hey, we are using this as the foundation of the Oxide control plane. Are we going to be violating the BSL, or I believe Josh, you called it the so-called BSL, which is what I insist that we all call it, the so-called BSL. But they were, to Cockroach's credit, they were very explicit about what constitutes database as a service, and in particular, if a user cannot create a schema or modify a schema, they consider it to be non-competitive. It's like, okay. Great. That's very specific and technical. That's not an entry in a FAQ. That's like in the license. It's very concrete. I think we don't really have that here, but correct me if that's incorrect.
I'd love to speak to that actually, because I've done a lot of thinking about their license. So just to be clear, the way that they structure their license, they use this business source license, which, by the way, sometimes people say BSL because that's the acronym for business source license. And sometimes people like Corey, just a moment ago, say Busel because that's the official SPDX shorthandle for the business source license. So just in case anyone's a nerd on that kind of stuff like I am.
I also say Busel because it sounds gross, and I want people to realize.
I like it. I like it. I just got out of a abusive relationship.
That's a good one.
I think Metabucel every morning.
I never appreciate all of these puns. Well, yeah. So I'm just going to adopt it now. I guess the Busel. As a standard license, it just says absolutely no production usage is allowed, but you can do anything you want for non-production usage. And then the way it's structured is they have this thing called an additional use grant. And if you actually look at the license text, it's like this header that they have there. It's almost like metadata to the text. And the one additional use grant that they give you is they say you can use it in production as long as A, you're not a competitor, and B, if you are a competitor, you don't embed Terraform or host Terraform. And so to go back to your original point, Brian, one of the major issues with that is that it's vague. What does it mean to be a competitor? What does it mean to embed? And what does it mean to host? And to HashiCorp's credit, they have addressed that, but kind of. Like the first issue I have is that they address it in the FAQ. And an FAQ is not a license. And so now you're left to wonder as an end user, like, okay, so I read the license and it's unclear. So I go to the FAQ. The FAQ adds additional clarity, but is that binding and can that change? So it's vague. And not only that, but even the definitions that they give in the FAQ, it's like more words, but it still has ambiguity. And so
they've already made it clear that it can change, right? They just changed it. They just changed the license. So they've made it clear the license for the software is what they feel like.
The FAQs, to be clear, when you go to the FAQs, each of the FAQs has each one has a last updated date, and the embedded one was updated today. So there's a more clear definition that was added today of what embedded means. By the way, the one we were talking about earlier was point 26. So question 26 updated last week. So
if I may, part of the reason this is so disappointing is that so much of Terraform, for example, Terraform's success, to me at least, has been on the back of its openness. And people I'm sure the folks who are embedded Terraform into their products, who are represented here, made that choice in part because of its openness. When I started using Terraform years and years ago, I wouldn't have used it if it was some proprietary software, or even if it was some Busel software. It was because of its openness. So it's so disappointing to have the ladder pulled up.
Adam, you're really right, and because I feel, and this is part of the reason why open source became so important for infrastructure software, is that you got investment protection, and one of the things that folks don't necessarily remember from the bad old days of proprietary software, but if you've got proprietary software now that remains, you will see bad behavior from rent-sinking companies where you will build a product based on a proprietary product, and now when you go to re-up your license or suddenly you've lost all of your leverage, and that investment protection was really, really important. I mean, Adam, part of the reason that you'd had that disposition around Terraform was like, hey, I'm going to build some infrastructure that's going to stick around for a while. And it's kind of my responsibility to the future to make sure that we're building on something where they don't have to worry about this. And I really think, I gave this talk a decade ago on corporate open source anti-patterns. And I said actually that I would come back in 2022 to talk about the new mistakes that we had made. And I really feel that first among them is relicensing. I think that there is a social contract here that is being set aside. And I think especially for those folks that contributed, and Adam, you mentioned you'd contributed at some point to Terraform. Right. I'm sure, Josh, you, Malcolm, and Corey, and you've got certainly folks who have. Those folks assigned their copyright to HashiCorp. And to me, that assigned, because HashiCorp demanded it, and to me, that assignment of copyright bounded that relationship by trust. Like, I am now trusting you to exercise my intent, which is to keep this open source under the MPLv2.
I also think
go ahead.
One reason there's so much talk about Terraform versus Vault or anything like that is Terraform is different in that it benefits from more users. You get more people writing providers, more people writing tools on top of it. Whereas Vault and Console, those sort of benefit from enough people to keep the code being developed. But Terraform's really, it's a language, it's a compiler to turn HCL into infrastructure. And I think that's different. And those are more community projects rather than just products.
Absolutely. And I do think, and that's why I think this was a bad idea, poorly implemented, but one of the kind of complexions of poor implementation here is the fact that this was done across this entire very disparate suite. So it's very hard to kind of suss out the intent. And I had kind of assumed, although now, I'm really questioning that assumption, that Terraform was kind of collateral damage on the way to going to monetize Vault to prevent AWS, for example, or a cloud provider, from having a Vault-based service, but it kind of sounds like that's not the case, honestly. And which is really, it however you cut it, it violates the trust that is so important in open source. I mean, Adam, you kind of said this point earlier about when everything they kind of say in the FAQ is like, well, I'm having some trust issues with you now. So. And Josh, I'm sure you and Malcolm and Corey and the kind of the broader Terraform community, you almost feel like if at this point Hashi were to walk it back, don't you feel that you still would have some trust issues there?
I definitely would. I probably have like the spiciest takes out of the group. So take some heartburn medicine.
Yeah, Corey, you're definitely the spiciest.
I'm sorry. But like the trust, I mean, I wrote a blog post on Friday, kind of about this. I spent a lot of time watching some videos of Mitchell and Armand. I don't know them personally, just to be clear. I watched a bunch of videos. I was trying to get I'm a founder of a very early stage company, right? And so I was trying to get an idea of what happened, right? And just trying to make a through line as to where it went from this team of people that really cared about open source to where we landed. And I don't know if you guys talked about this before I joined. I'm old, so it took me forever to get into Discord. But there's a fallout that's happening right now. CNCF is looking at pulling HashiCorp tools from multiple dev workflows for Containerd, Kubernetes Kind, Flux2, Argo project. There's a bunch of people that now have busy work where they're going to try to pull these tools out and replace them with CNCF equivalents, so there's no issues, right? And so it's like this has ended up in a very weird place for a company that's so committed to open source. But I think that what's really telling about where HashiCorp is as a company today is they were committed to open source, sure, but we had the same panic 2 years ago when they announced they weren't taking PRs anymore because they were understaffed. Does everybody remember that?
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They stopped taking contributions. They didn't ask for help. They didn't do a call for maintainers. They stopped accepting community is what they did, right? That's really what they did. They stopped accepting community. And now, in the light of this happening, you see competitors and people in the space come together and offer resources. We're offering them the community they say that they want. But that's the thing that's really weird for me about their commitment is I feel like they don't have a commitment to open source. I don't think they really care about the community as much as they try to make it out to be. And this boost will change. I think there's something else probably driving it, but the community is here. We want to help. We don't want a fork. We're contributing resources. We're offering things, and HashiCorp isn't accepting them. And that's what we really, I think, want to push for is getting this to not be a fork and really getting them to come back to where they used to be. And will we be able to trust them from there? I think if they truly handed it over to a foundation, yeah, but simply a license reversal, reverting a commit isn't going to do it. I think we got to see it land in a foundation's hands.
Well, and so, and Corey, I can't judge by the latency in terms of you getting into Discord, in terms of your exact age. It's like tree rings in terms of aging, determining the exact vintage. But I don't know if you remember Hudson, and I feel like Hudson has been kind of culturally lost. So Hudson was a ubiquitous platform for CI, and one of the many horrific things that Oracle did, the mechanized Oracle did after the acquisition of Sun, was they decided that actually that Hudson, they were going to enforce the trademark of Hudson, and it was effectively going to be proprietary. And the community turned on a dime and turned that into Jenkins. And Jenkins was Hudson for many years, and it was remarkable to me how quickly, just for all the same reasons you're outlining, because there's a real broad grassroots momentum around Jenkins, and Adam, you remember that the whole and it happened very quickly.
We had just started using Hudson, and it just it was like schooling fish. Everyone turned at the same instant. It was remarkable.
And Jenkins survived and thrived. So I do think that fortunately, Oracle provides a case study for the survival of open source projects after the most mendacious corporate behavior. Thank you, Oracle, I guess. And just in terms of the strength of the community being able to kind of propel an alternative forward, or because I think is another, and this is a great segue into the OpenTF work that you all have kind of come together to form. The one potential and maybe even likely outcome here is that OpenTF does have to become a fork, is a fork for some number of months, and Hashi realizes actually we want to participate. So how can we? And then the terms would be very different. It's this is going to be in a foundation and so on. This is not dissimilar. This happened at at Joyent, where I was the Joyent. We were the stewards of Node.js, and the community was really fracturing over a bunch of issues. And there was a fork that started there. As I told them, like, you actually didn't need to fork it to get our attention, but we. I think for me, it was eye-opening in terms of how difficult it was going to be for any single company to keep what was a pretty fractured community together, and that a foundation was going to be the right route for Node. I think that the foundation route ultimately, I mean, I'd love to get your all take on this, but it feels like the foundation route has to be the route for this software. One of the things that I would revisit from my talk 10 years ago is I was kind of jaundiced about foundations, and that was before a lot of this, frankly, abuse of trust. And I kind of feel like actually foundations are, when you've got a broad-based community, it really needs to be in a foundation. Do you want to maybe, in terms of like a segue to OpenTF? So how quickly after this did you? I mean, this, it sounds like it took everybody by surprise. Everyone was kind of on the back foot. How did you start reaching out to one another? How did you find one another? How did the OpenTF effort start?
Yeah, I can comment on that. In my opinion, that was actually one of the most magical things that happened from this. So we've had a number of companies that were either competitors or like they kind of used our stuff and we sort of competed. And these are people I've maybe spoken to once or never met, but you see online when they post something. All of a sudden, within a day of that announcement taking place, so literally by that Friday, we had a Slack community among all these so-called competitors where we were all sort of united by a common cause. The word that kept coming to my mind was like fellowship. We're like a fellowship of companies who all were looking to a need for an open source Terraform that we could continue to innovate and build our companies on. And then from there, the idea that we would need to fork, but maybe present Hashi with the opportunity to first revoke, like all these discussions were happening. We had our own little de facto governance mechanism, like little Slack polls. We were all commenting on how much fun it was to like be collaborating with all these competitors. So, and to this day, to this day, it was like a week ago. To this day, I don't know, it remains one of my most positive like business memories because it's just so fun to go from this kind of like distant competitive mindset to collaborating with a group of people all united in a common cause. And what I was surprised to learn was how many more resources and willingness we all had to contribute to Terraform open source than what was actually currently being contributed to Terraform open source. Sorry, I know I'm at risk of rambling, but just to add this one point, I've had a bunch of customer conversations in the last week, and a common refrain that I've heard from customers is, but how could your consortium possibly have the resources to maintain the giant that is Terraform? And I'm always like chuckling at that because I get it, like the nice branding, the publicly traded company image, the regular blog posts, the regular releases. It looks like there's dozens or hundreds of people working on this tool. And when we did the internal estimation, we estimated that it was a small fraction at HashiCorp, the total number of people actually working on Terraform open source as the number of people we would be able to marshal as a consortium. So that's, I think, given us all a lot of pause as we think about what the path forward might look like.
As you say that, I think back to now like 13 years ago, Brian, when we were kicking off the Illumos project. There was never any thought of like presenting a demand letter to Oracle because we knew what the answer was going to be there. But like it felt sort of in some ways daunting. And this is when, Brian, you were at Joyent and I was at Delphix and Garrett was, I think, at Nexenta. And there was something very inspiring that what you're describing, Josh, of that moment of kind of becoming this fellowship or collaborating across company borders to get this thing done, to like erect this monolith, it was kind of inspiring.
It definitely was, and it was clarifying, obviously. But it's like, yeah, we're on our own. Like, we don't have to, like, all of these. It honestly felt like a weight had been lifted, where we had been, and Oracle was on such a speed run of open source malfeasance, and it's all happening very, very quickly. But we were very concerned about how do we accommodate Oracle with now so many Sun folks leaving, and we were all part of this big exodus. And one of the things that there were lots of things that we did not like about the way that it was being prosecuted internally when it was open. And people are like, well, you can't have your own operating system. It's like, no, actually, we can. It's like, actually, sorry. It's like, well, who writes the device drivers? It's like, yeah, we write the device. Like, we know how to write that, as it turns out. Like, we actually know how to create.
Yeah, it turns out like that. To put some more wind in your sails, turns out 13 years later, like that experiment is going fine for us. Like, we have not died on some mountain of complexity that only a team of 10,000 engineers could take on. So if it's any consolation to your customers, as they ask reasonable questions, saying, how are you going to maintain this thing? It's like, actually quite well.
And I would say that there was so much friction that we had for so long about what's important, who does what. And Sun, back when it was pre-Oracle, Sun had this outsized influence that was kind of uncontrollable. Like, ultimately, it wasn't a real community because Sun dominated it too much. And it only became a community when it was kind of forced to become one, really, a true community. And so, Josh, totally get what the vibes of, like, really kind of coming together, and the clarify. And so one thing I would love you all to speak to, because it's something that I loved in so that you put out the OpenTF manifesto. It obviously came together. It must have come together pretty quickly, it sounds like. Certainly by the time one of your number had actually pinged me, I was really honored, honestly, to be pinged, being like, hey, would you mind signing this thing? For us, we've got a Terraform provider, so Terraform definitely plays a role for us, but we're nowhere near as kind of at the epicenter as you all are. And honestly, was honored that we'd love to be able to help out any way we can, because I really loved all the energy. And in particular, what I loved, and Josh, maybe you can walk me through kind of when this started happening. As people are signing it, they're also talking about resources that they can actually dedicate to it. And it's like significant. People are talking about dedicating 2 and 3 folks to this effort. That kind of evolve? How did that start?
Yeah, initially there was this realization that we all had that a Bucel, I'm going to have to click on that from now on. Anyway, a Bucel licensed Terraform was just not a world any of us wanted to live in. And it wasn't just about commercially, like, is this something that we could make commercially viable? It's actually really important to share this. A lot of people have said, well, hey, I'm not a competitor to HashiCorp. This doesn't matter to me. Why should I care? From the perspective of someone who is considered, I suppose, a competitor to HashiCorp, we realized that, okay, so in order to actually participate in this Bucel licensed ecosystem, the license is so vague, almost by design, that we can't really operate in compliance with it unless we get HashiCorp's explicit permission. So now, in order to operate our business, presumably on an annual basis, we have to approach them on bended knee and ask for permission to continue operating as a business, and pray that they don't raise licensing prices on us too much. And
I absolutely. And by the way, just to kind of underscore that point, it is so vague that we are not embedding any Hashi products in the Oxide rack. But if we were, we Oxide would feel that it is far too vague, because in particular, that we don't know who's going to acquire HashiCorp. And take it from Adam and me. The acquirer can really, and it could easily be an Oracle acquisition. It could be a Broadcom acquisition. It could be a Dell acquisition, and those are all companies that could easily say that they compete with Oxide. And so it's like, Adam, I don't know what you're taking, but this is like too vague for us, let alone.
Are you kidding me? Not only that, but imagine a diligent customer of ours would say, "Hey, do you have anything fishy inside that box?" Like, well, we do have this Bucel thing. It's like, well, we don't know what that is. We can't accept this product. Like, don't bring this into our environment. Like, for all I know, that HashiCorp is going to show up and demand their extortion money from our customers. So it creates way too much risk.
Way too much risk. I'm actually glad you brought up that point, because that's something that's kind of lost on folks, is that having gone through an acquisition from someone who's doing a lot of due diligence with Samsung on Joyent, and they are, I can't remember what attorneys that are not at them. So we need to do a license audit on all of the node modules we're using. I'm like, well, this is going to be interesting. And I'm like, and it's a huge credit to the node ecosystem that it was tens of thousands of modules. It was actually great because we overwhelmed the firm that does open source due diligence. It's like, we cannot do due diligence. We've never seen this much open source before.
I love the idea of being like, well, we're out of compliance because we have to send this guy a cup of coffee. I don't know, it's in the license, but otherwise we can't left pad or whatever.
They're like, it will take us 6 years and $35 million to do the due diligence and all this open source software. And so they go like, all right, we're just going to do a license audit. We're going to stop. And we did a license audit, and amazingly, we had no. I'm like, oh my god, we're going to find an HGPL stowaway that's going to kill this thing. But there was nothing. It was all MIT and BSD. And there was not even any GPL or LGPL. It was really clean. And some Apache was basically all clean. But man, you hit something like that in an audit from a big potential customer or an acquirer, where they are thinking like, look, maybe you can make this decision, but this does not fit my risk appetite as someone with much deeper pockets. And you just like, this is part of the reason that all of you can't adopt this. This is like, no, this is crazily risky.
So funny little side story. We actually just finished our first priced round a few days before this announcement, and we did a full license audit that probably would have tanked our round if this would have happened. We haven't even announced the round because we got so caught up in this initiative.
Oh man. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, God, thank God. I think you got it done. Congratulations, on that, obviously, on the raise, and good. Yeah, glad you sold the house before the flood. That's
Hold on, I'm sensitive on that one. I got hit by this tropical storm and it took my roof.
Oh man! Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's cool. It's a small patch. It'll be fine.
That's quite a.
But in reading all of the Hacker News and Reddit comments on this, I think so there's a lot of comments saying, I'm just a regular Terraform user, why should I care? And I think to what you said, Brian, like, there's just this endless list of small places where this could trip you up, and they're hard to predict, and it does impact you a lot as a regular user, and it's hard to know what will happen in the future, like maybe another license change. The FAQ is apparently binding, but it gets changed every day, so who knows what's going to go in there.
Yeah,
totally. And I also think that for those folks who are asking that question, like, well, I don't compete with Hashi, like that doesn't really affect me. It's like, it definitely does affect you, because the folks that are gonna contribute to the community and its vitality, it affects them, and that vitality very much affects you. I mean, you are that is to say, someone who feels that they're more removed from this. It's like, unless you're like a really active contributor, it is going to affect you. And now the good news is, like, you're probably not going to, like, when the world moves to OpenTF, you're like, all right, fine, we're doing this now. It's just not going to feel as disruptive, because that's where the community is going to go.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, there was a lot of debate about what the vision for the fork should be. And the two primary paradigms that we were choosing from were, number one, we're essentially just a legal clone of what the kind of Hashi TF fork is doing. Well, I guess they're not a fork, so maybe I'll just call it Hashi TF. And the model there would have been like, we just look at what they release, we make sure not to ever look at the source code, and then we just implement it ourselves. But then we realized that, we can actually innovate. Like one of the things that HashiCorp kind of locked down was the only real interface to the Terraform libraries is the CLI interface itself. But they don't expose the libraries in a way that would make them easily usable by tools that were embedding them, because that didn't really make sense for their commercial interest, presumably. So with OpenTF, we realized, like, wow, if we expose, for example, Terraform apply functionality as a library call, then people can do all kinds of cool things with it. And it really expands the notion of what Terraform could be and how you could use it, and becomes a lot more interesting and exciting.
I think absolutely. And I would counsel, Adam, I know you'd counsel the same way, that like you should be looking to your own use cases, your own customers, for your own community, for what you do, not to Hashi.
Yeah.
We felt this way. D-Trace too, but especially ZFS, Adam, got a real burst of innovation when, in particular, because all of the featuring, the feature identification, Adam.
Exactly right. It was really interesting, actually. I was thinking about that example because ZFS, prior to, in Open Solaris, even prior to Illumos, envisioned a straight line of features. It was just version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each version carried new features with it. And in this kind of diaspora, then we had different versions of ZFS and then OpenZFS that had different features enabled. And before, we had seen that, even from inside working on Open Solaris, we had seen that as sort of a bug. And then in a community, it was really a feature to enable lots of people to go their own ways and do their own experiments and enable their own products and customers without necessarily requiring everyone to move in lockstep on every decision.
Yeah, it was a huge one. I feel like we had a bunch of those, and it was also helpful, honestly. And I imagine that there will be people like this from Hashi. I can say that. I don't think I'm divulging any great confidence when I say there are lots of people in Hashi who are pretty disillusioned with their employer. And I've heard from a lot of folks, gotten a lot of DMs from folks who are. And by the way, the advice, if you are at Hashi, my advice to you would be, this is really going to be very divisive. And Adam, you and I lost relationships permanently over this issue, over the acute disagreement of what the future of the software should be. And there are going to be these disagreements are going to be pretty sharp, unfortunately, and there's not an easy thing to say about it. It's really, really divisive. And I wish that there were, try to find it's always important that whatever entity you're working with, be it a community or a company, you want to find one that reflects your values. And I think that there are lots of people at Hashi who are really wondering, what happened to this place? Is this still the place that reflects my values?
Well,
but I think that Josh, sorry, a long way of saying, I think it's almost a lock that you will have some number of people who love Terraform, and that's what brought them to Hashi, who leave Hashi and contribute to an OpenTF with their visions too. And it's like, that's it. Those are people you want to have in the community, bringing a lot of expertise.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that we were thinking about on the OpenTF side was about the philosophical decision that HashiCorp made. And interestingly, the company I represent, Frontwork, we had a sort of parallel philosophical decision. So essentially, the main concern that Hashi had is, from their perspective, they were saying, hey, we're pouring all these resources into Terraform and other people are profiting from it. That's not fair. And so the philosophy comes into how you choose to respond to that. Personally, the philosophy that I endorse is, if you're the creator of an open source project, or you're kind of sitting at the epicenter of it, that's a unique competitive advantage, and it's incumbent on you as the the creator of the open source tool or the sitting at the epicenter, to figure out how to leverage that to make a better product. And that's how you make it work. I think Hashi took the other tack, which was basically to say, okay, we don't like what's happening here. We don't necessarily have confidence that we can compete with the products that we've got. And so we're going to just disable competitors from competing in this ecosystem. What's an interesting add-on to that is Gruntwork has an open source tool called TerraGrunt, which is a thin wrapper around Terraform that is MIT licensed with, by the way, no plans to change that. But what's interesting is there are companies out there that leverage Gruntwork or leverage TerraGrunt in the OpenTF consortium, and they make a bunch of money from it, and we don't see any money from that. And but we spend money to create TerraGrunt, and we think that's okay because we also get some benefits from creating TerraGrunt, and we think we have some unique advantages by being the maintainers. And if we ever want to do more there, then we can try to leverage those benefits and exercise our business muscle and offer a valuable product to customers. So
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Josh. Sorry, yeah, no, definitely. I was just going to say that I actually, we went through all of this when the open sourcing of the operating system was being contemplated at Sun. And I mean, this is really the beauty of software, because the way I would flip it around is, so you've got someone out there who's using TerraGrunt and is selling services on it or what have you. It didn't cost you anything to engage them. Right, those entities have kind of identified themselves like, hey, like we share values, we share interests, we're kind of partnering with you, and I think it is reductive to say like, well, they're taking our work and profiting on it. It's like, well, actually, they are incorporating your work into something else that they're selling, but that is also, you didn't have to have a business development relationship kind of build that. And on the one hand, it's not transactional one way, but it's not transactional the other way either. You didn't have to pay for ads. You didn't have to this other entity is kind of self-identified. And boy, there's a lot of opportunity now to go figure out what you can go build together. And if there's nothing to build together, it's like, well, it didn't cost you anything anyway. And I think that the big fallacy that I always saw inside the corporate walls is people like, the choice that I Hashi have is that this entity pays me for Terraform, or this entity does not pay me for Terraform. And it's like, well, that's actually not the choice you've got. The choice you've got is that, because that entity probably has already, for Adam, all the reasons that you adopted Terraform, it's probably already decided they're going to adopt open source infrastructure. So it's really your open source infrastructure or someone else's open source infrastructure. And which of those do you want? Because that's actually the choice you're making. And if they adopt your open source infrastructure, there's an opportunity to go do something later together. If they adopt someone else's, it's like, yeah, you're just out of the conversation. And I feel like that's the fallacy that Hashi is falling prey to, in part because I do feel that, like, for a generation that simply came up post open source, they don't understand. I mean, I want to be a reread. I don't know if you'd read it today, but Bill Gates's An Open Letter to Hobbyists, 1976. Looks like it was peeled right from Hashi's FAQ, or vice versa. Like, I don't think that they realize the degree to which you sound like a sniveling Bill Gates in 1976, talking about people pirating their BASIC. And I think that this is part of the reason why I think the reverence for history is so important in the industry, because it's like, you got to like, you're not the first entity that has kind of struggled with this, but the conclusion you're drawing is not the right conclusion to draw. And now that Adam, at what point are we going to talk about the video?
Yeah, we got to talk about that video.
So first, question for Josh and Malcolm and Corey. Did you all watch the video?
This is a video of
Hashi made.
I guess being interviewed by a developer advocate there.
I couldn't make it all the way through.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
okay.
made it about a quarter of the way through, and I lulled myself into closing the tab.
Okay, Josh.
Yeah, it was. The problem was it was like a faux conversation. With obviously like teed up questions.
We are here to report something shocking and delightful and open for debate, I feel.
That's right. So Brian, you watched it. You sent it over to me, and I was watching it, and I had the same reaction as the other folks. I actually paused it, got up, and took a walk, and then got my notebook because I wanted to write down some of the particularly odious things. But then I noticed something, which is that the developer advocate, and I'm not going to name her, had this wild background, and I DM'd it over to Brian. And Brian, what was your reaction when I sent you this picture?
Like hand on heart, my reaction was Adam has had Dolly generate an image of formerly open source company announcing license change, and he has photoshopped in this abstract image. And I was just like, damn, he did that quickly. And I was just like, and then a part of my brain was like, no, wait a minute. We recognize that from the video we watched moments ago. And indeed, it's so Adam has dropped this into the chat. But like you've got this kind of like okay, so someone is saying like this is a psyop. Okay, so Adam, why don't you talk about your hypothesis?
So I think that this dev advocate is staging a quiet rebellion here. So the picture to describe it is a like sort of blobby, faceless, mysterious, sort of human-ish looking thing.
Looks like the offspring of Grimace and Jabba the Hutt.
Like the Loch Ness Monster or something.
Yes.
Holding a goldfish and squeezing out gold coins.
The goldfish is vomiting gold. Literally vomiting gold.
And so, I mean,
I love
does this person tell me.
I love that there are people right now that were like washing their dishes or walking the dog or driving who just like, what the hell? Who just pulled over or stopped doing the dishes or stopped walking the dog and are now on their phone being like, I gotta see this. Like this, it surely cannot be what they're describing. It's like,
and so this is over the right shoulder of the dev advocate who's ostensibly interviewing Armin, the CEO and co-founder. And I don't know, like either she sits there and this has been over her right shoulder for years and years, like the last scene in The Usual Suspects or something.
Or like this Spanish prisoner. It's
totally, like or this is some quiet, brilliant act of rebellion. She's like, okay, I'll interview you, I guess. Let me just change my Zoom background real quick before we do that. Because if you, as you're saying, Brian, it's one step removed to having this blobby entity slicing open a goose and plucking out the golden eggs. And that would be just only slightly more on the nose.
I feel it legit would have been subtler if they had some Dickensian era miser wearing a top hat, holding an orphan by its ankle, shaking him loose of any bread in his pockets. I feel that would be subtler than this.
Oh man.
It's just shocking. So yeah, I'm sorry to distract us on this. Adam and I just knew that like we got to get this out. We got. So had you all seen this first of all?
I did not notice this upon looking.
Right, you're too busy, understandably. Like I mean, Adam and I could barely get through the video, and we are nowhere near in the crosshairs of this thing, as you all are. But yeah, it's definitely something else, and it's I mean a little too on the nose.
That's right. And to folks at Hashi, listen to this. Resistance is alive and thriving, apparently.
The sign we will give the sign of Grimace to know that we are one with the resistance inside of HashiCorp.
Everyone has like a goldfish tank on their desk on Monday.
Totally, exactly. Brilliant.
I mean, I get the coin and I get the gold coins, but I really do not know what the purple thing is. Like, what is the purple thing?
Oh, we know what the purple thing is. The purple thing is an announcement to our community.
That's right. Capital.
It's the fact. That is the fact. You can see 0.26 on there.
Oh man.
So when you all announced this, I mean, I certainly, and it sounds like there was a lot of kind of positive energy around the formation of this. But you definitely saw that. It feels like you saw that positive energy continue as you announced it. It seems like a lot of grassroots enthusiasm for the effort here. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, like I said earlier, the vendors themselves were really excited about working with each other. And then there are all these people that reached out to us to express support. There were some high profile folks who reached out and privately expressed their support as well. And we had members of the Terraform core contributor team from times past express their support. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of neat to see that manifesto get more and more names, companies, projects, and individuals endorsing it. And in the beginning, I think we published it with like what do you guys think? Like 7 names, 7 companies, maybe.
Yeah, there
Yeah, I
was
think
just
so.
a handful. Yeah, it was about 7, and the first sign signature came in, and I was like, oh, somebody else cares.
Yes, exactly.
It was just like the wall of PRs started coming in, and it was like, yes.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
like a tip, if this happens to anyone else, do not do it like we did, where people pledge by making an HTML PR. Because the merge conflicts.
Talking with the other elephant in the room. Listen, I don't want to tell you the way to manifesto, but literally every PR is a merge conflict. It was brutal.
Yeah. That was my personal contribution to this project. Is I took an hour of my life and I handled those merge conflicts.
And somebody's got some silly indentation, so I've had to turn off my my save on format or format on save.
But I can just imagine before you guys went live being like, all right, look, I mean, if we have hundreds of PRs, I mean, hurt me with that problem. It's like, well, here we are, we're being hurt with that problem now. It's a great problem to have in terms of having so much interest that you've got merge conflicts. I was definitely like, man, I'm having a hard time landing this thing because I'm having a hard time having to rebase 6 different times to actually touch down here. But
think how many signatures we'd have if it didn't require a rebase.
But I have to say, one of the things that you were, you kind of see as thinking like, okay, how do we kind of structure this or whatever, structure the list. One of the things that I was kind of privately hoping you would do, and it looks like you did do, I'm like, you got folks that are really committing resources to this, and I really loved the fact that those folks were kind of at the top. Like there's a bunch of signatories to this, a bunch of people that agree with it, but it was really heartwarming to see the folks that were really being willing to make commitments, and I'm sure they were seeing the commitments that others were making, and it was great to see. And any reaction from any official reaction from Hashi? I'm gonna assume the answer is no. You know what? Feel free to not answer that question.
Well, we have none. So just to be clear, we actually tweeted from the OpenTF Twitter account that we're officially waiting until this Friday, August 25th, for a response. Because remember, in the manifesto, we said, look, we think that no fork is better for everyone, if that's possible. Now, there are some legitimate questions you raised earlier about to what extent would we all trust such a reversion to an open source license, but there's some overhead to a fork as well. It creates confusion.
It definitely creates confusion. And to be clear, I think that I definitely think that there shouldn't be a fork. I just think that the foundation needs to be in the driver's seat. I think that OpenTF needs to be the ones. And if Hashi wants to come back, they should come back. But they should come back to participate in the new project. And the new project is the OpenTF project.
Exactly. So we're waiting for them officially to reply by August 25th, this Friday. But then they just published this sort of clarification of their FAQ earlier today. So I personally interpreted that as a sort of implicit rejection, and I guess we'll see if they respond at all. But yeah, if we don't get an official response by this 25th, this Friday, then we plan to proceed with the fork. In fact, we've got several engineers in the consortium already working on a private version of that and getting it ready. And there's a ton of energy. CI jobs are running. Terraform names are removed to make sure we're compliant with all the trademark requirements. Yeah, I mean, I think if we were to have to revert, there'd be a lot of sadness. Like it's going to be
interesting,
pretty cool project, actually.
Well, and I think that I don't think I think that the end state here is not a reversion. It's Hashi coming to the community as a community member,
Yeah.
and I think that part of the other reason I think that this is important is because I do think that Hudson has drifted too far away in the collective memory. I mean, to the point where it doesn't even make hey, folks that are making a list of Oracle's top 10 open source transgressions. This definitely Hudson belongs on that list. I know there are a lot of things kind of vying for the maybe a top 20 list, but people have kind of forgotten about it. And I do feel that companies that have benefited from open source have benefited from that social contract, and indeed the whole reason that your technology was ever adopted by anybody was because it was open source. Those companies need to not take their communities for granted, and it's important that the community speak with its voice and as a check, because what you want is that the kind of the future company that is contemplating this. It would be helpful to have an object lesson being like, boy, yeah, but could we create another? Could we end up losing everything in the process of doing this? And this should really, right now, this is kind of thought of as being zero risk. These relicensing changes, and they are. They're really divisive. They're very disruptive to the community, and we really need to. This needs to be thought of more like litigation. Like you go into litigation, you're going to war, you can lose a lot, even if you're a plaintiff. That's what you're doing when you're relicensing. You are spinning the roulette wheel with your company on the board, and it's and your community, and you could lose it all. Because the open source itself, the community is not going to be vanquished. The community, you all, and Josh, sounds like this is kind of the realization you all had. Is like, wait a minute, we may be competitors, but we're kind of competing in this broader infrastructure as code ecosystem. But we got a lot of shared values here, and we can bond together to reflect those shared values in a shared project.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we actually did in the first couple of days of OpenTF was we started thinking with the product manager's mindset and working backward from the outcome that our customers would want. Our customers being people who choose technology to deploy their infrastructure. And we were thinking, okay, such a person would want legal clarity. They'd want to know the tool's popular, the project is active, there's a clear vision, high investment in the project. It's publicly endorsed by names that they recognize or foundations they recognize. There's commercial support available. There's a broad ecosystem available. It's compatible with their favorite tools, and it has features that they want. And ultimately, we feel like in addition to the legal clarity that OpenTF can offer, a lot better than the Bucel HashiCorp, Terraform, we actually think the project can compete on its own merits, even separate from that, pretty effectively too.
Yeah, that's terrific. There's a question in the chat about, and maybe a little too early to think about the specific foundation of this, or maybe you already have, whether you do OpenTF as its own foundation that would kind of pull in other infrastructure software, or if you've given kind of thoughts to that, or are you deferring all of that until after Friday?
Oh, no, it's just focused on Terraform. Like all enterprises, focus is hard, but it yields the best results. So this is a pure Terraform effort. It is unrelated to Vault or Console or anything else. We're just focused on making the best possible version of OpenTF that we can make.
That's great. And would you do that as its own 501c6, or how would you? Why am I uttering rumpus? Let's get here.
If you have opinions about the Linux Foundation, do you want to share about the Linux Foundation? Anything?
I just feel like I'm about to talk to my teenagers about a bad decision they're going to contemplate. Like, look, you're going to be at a party where there's a lot of Linux Foundation going on, and I just want you to know who you are.
That's right. Just be
And
safe.
be safe. And if you need me to come pick you up, I will. Have you given thought to the kind of specific foundation vehicle, Josh?
Yeah. So, we recognize that we need a governance structure of some kind because there's going to be multiple different companies all contributing resources. And there has to be some mechanism for how we set the roadmap, how we are reviewing PRs, how we respond to GitHub issues, and things like that. So we want to move ideally to the CNCF. That's something that we've been looking into. And some of our members have had some discussions there. And but most of all, we just want a sort of governance structure where we're not innovating on that. Like, let's find whatever the best open source governance structure is that can accommodate lots of different companies, and let's just adopt that. So that's the real need. The foundation is sort of the solution to that need.
Well, and truthfully, I mean, being in the LF, the CNCF does. I mean, that does solve a bunch of problems for you. So I think that may. Like, now I'm pouring the kids a drink here, Adam.
Yeah, just drink here with us where it's safe.
Exactly. For the record, not one of those houses. But I mean, I think you're wise to kind of stay focused on what you're trying to, the problems you're trying to solve, and the problems you're not trying to solve. You don't want to reinvent, obviously. But and hopefully those talks are fruitful, because I think you do have. I mean, this is software that is at the foundation of a lot of stuff, and it's really important, and it's important that it stays open. And I loved the kind of the tenor you struck in your manifesto about, like, we are trying to assure an open source Terraform. That is the objective of OpenTF. And Bucel ain't that.
Yep.
So
it just to dovetail on that, just to especially for naive users, for folks who aren't familiar with any of this stuff, to make the path unencumbered in a way where new folks could easily walk themselves into a situation they don't mean to. So I think the work that you're doing here is so important to create, or to actually take that torch that Hashi carried for so many years and built up with Terraform and these other projects, and lives up to that commitment, or that you're able to carry forward that commitment for new users, existing users, and for this really big and thriving community. Like, we're building Terraform providers, for the Oxide rack. We want to make those OpenTF providers, and we're going to guide our users there because it's going to be the right place to use it.
Yeah.
As hectic as this
Sorry, go ahead, Malcolm.
as hectic as this last 11 days has been, I do think, in some sense, like the silver lining is, I do think OpenTF or Terraform, what you want to call it, is going to come out a much stronger, better product.
For sure.
And if you go the foundation route, you don't have a single vendor in control of all the features that go into it, because there's a lot of people competing that would be part of this foundation. You don't. You get a lot of innovation, but everyone benefits from it. And so I really think we all win, despite not being able to sleep a lot from that weekend. We're all going to win in the end, I think.
Totally agree, Malcolm. And just for whatever it's worth, I absolutely think it needs to be in a foundation. I think the question is, is it just mechanically, is it an existing foundation to use the LF? I think that, which sounds like to use another 501c6, the C3 route is a much harder route, and I would definitely recommend a C6 route. So no, I think you're doing exactly the right thing by going to foundation. To preserve trademark and so on. One question that did come up in the chat is like, all right, well, so how do you recommend, like, so when someone does use your software and they are using it as part of an offering that is commercial, like, how are you supposed to deal with that? And Adam, you and I had this happen because the software that we developed is used by one of the most profitable companies on earth, in terms of Apple. and you have to have the kind of self-awareness to realize that like your software is not the only thing that there's a product and a service that company is developing, of which your software plays a role. And it's kind of natural for me to say, well, no, my software is the only thing that's like well, it's maybe not, probably not. It's probably more nuanced than that. And certainly in Apple's case, it's like, no, Apple's delivering a product to their customers. They're very innovation oriented, and the fact that they chose to integrate our technology, I think we viewed as exciting and uplifting. I don't think we, again, because it's like the opportunity was not Apple, Dave's son or whomever, a licensing fee for this. It's like that was never going to be on the table. It's like they use it or they don't, and I'd much rather they use it than not. I do feel that like those open source companies, I think that and I know they got a bunch here. You really want to focus on the goods and services that you make and serving your customers. Josh, I loved hearing that you've been talking to your own customers about it, because ultimately, like, that's who's important for all of us. It's like the people who are gonna pay you for your product or service. Those are the ones who we ultimately are all serving. And that's part of what feels like is the entity that's not being well served by Hashi's decision are their own customers.
Yeah, exactly. Every company creates value and captures a small portion of that value. And in order for the company to be successful, you have to have a well-defined business model of how you're going to capture value. And so there's nothing wrong with that. Like those business models that make companies successful allow them to create really great tools. I think the confusion comes in when companies mistake what the role of open source is in their business model.
Yeah.
Is it lead generation? Like, okay, great. It's great lead generation. Or is it a free tier of your product? Or is it something else? And so I think that's one of the things that was so shocking about the HashiCorp element is I always saw it as lead generation for them. Like Terraform is the gateway drug, and then you could try some of their commercial offerings, but there are alternatives too. And they've kind of turned it off to the point where like it is the product. It's just the thing you purchase directly. So with OpenTF, we're kind of stepping outside of that paradigm, and we're saying, look, all these different companies need this thing to exist. So we think it can support a prosperous ecosystem. And each of the companies, well, we'll figure out our own business models. But the core thing that you're using, OpenTF, that's going to be thriving independently into itself, which will hopefully inspire confidence when users use it. Yeah.
Yeah, amen. And Josh, to which I would add, in terms of the other kind of importance of open source, it's also an opportunity for a conversation with someone with whom you share values. It's opportunity for potentially folks that want to work for you. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity with open source, and there's a lot of energy that you get to harness. I know when Dave McJanet was announced the new CEO of HashiCorp, I was at HashiConf. I think it was in 2016. And Adam was with you. I met Scott Hammond, I think. Did you meet Scott?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Scott, I was with Scott, who was the CEO of Joint at the time. And there's so much energy at HashiConf. And the new CEO is there, but like nowhere to be found, like not on stage. And Scott is just like, "Oh my God, this is CEO malpractice! Like, let me be the CEO of Hashi." I'm like, "Hey, you've already got a job, pal. Like, hey, check your ring finger, pal. Like, you're not the CEO." But he's like, "God, I want to be the CEO because I would be having all these conversations with people that are using this technology. There's so many conversations to be had." And his instinct is not, "Oh, I want to go sell to all these people." It's, I want to learn what they're doing. I want to understand what they're doing. I want to understand how the technology that we have developed is being used by you. And there's a lot that can come from those conversations. And, there's a lot of opportunity there. It's just, Josh, just to your point, like you're just going to have to get creative and in a really exciting and uplifting way.
Yeah.
This has been great. This has been I was super flattered. We are flattered at Oxide that you all looked to us to contribute our name to it. We were honored to do so, and really excited to be a part of wherever you take OpenTF, you know that you got a kindred spirit and a supporter here at Oxide, and we want to help you all out any way you can. It's energizing to see this community come together.
Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, a lot of us are fans of Oxide, and some of your founders, including yourself, Brian, and Jesse. So yeah, we were really honored when you guys joined. So it means a lot to us as well.
Well, that was awesome. And Malcolm, I love when we were talking about the podcast. You're like, don't like I'm a fan of the podcast. Like I'm gonna. I mean, it was that was.
Yeah, you're like, check out the back catalog, and I was like, like again.
Exactly. Well, that was. I mean, honestly, that's so great, and we're just excited that we could have this conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to what's next for you all and OpenTF. And Corey, good luck with your roof. I'm so sorry to hear about your roof.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get that straightened out here the next day or so.
No, awesome, and congratulations on your success with the round. And Josh, Malcolm, again, great work with OpenTF. And can't wait to see where it goes.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right.
Yeah,
Definitely. This is great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Let's see if I can figure out how to log out of this thing.
Just turn your phone off.